Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're reading Corrupt. It's a Chisaki X-Reader fanfiction. This one is part 11, I believe. I could be wrong. Might be 12. I don't think it's 10. I think the last one I recorded was 10. I don't know. I think we're only going to read chapter 24 today because I have other stuff I need to do and I've got a small break right now to record. I might do some more much later in the day, but I don't know. Let's begin. Chapter 24. Strange Emotions. Overhaul. We are ready to begin. Oh, you brought her here? You'd been brought before a door which you'd never once opened. Once inside, Chisaki's aide, Kiran, was already waiting. He wasn't wearing the usual plague mask, which veiled the entirety of his face. He traded it for a white surgical mask. Given the circumstances, you supposed it was only appropriate, but it did little to quell the churning in your stomach. Yes, Chisaki said, having left your side to walk over. Traveler will be overseeing our experiments today. She thought it would help Eri feel more at ease. Kiran's brow seized. He stared at you dubiously. Yes, of course, if you feel that would be to Eri's advantage. You could see his security from across the room. Understandably so, you couldn't imagine Chisaki doing anything in Eri's best interest, at least not without your involvement. He was cold and Methodological. Nope, not that I can't. I know what the word is, and I can say it in my head. It won't come out as that word. I can't. Methodical when it came to realizing his ambitions. You knew you should be scared of him, especially now, staring at the black medical chair in the center of the room, all sorts of ominous instruments protruding from the ceiling above and all around. You knew you should be, but your heart bore no fear, or even malice. Without me, he would have never thought about how Eri-chan felt, right? Maybe to some extent I'm actually... Let's not waste any more precious time. The test has already been deployed, but we're still far from our finished product. Chisaki removed his jacket and hung it in a corner of the room, trading it for a white lab coat. Kiran took the plague mask off of his hands and brought him a surgical one identical to his own. You couldn't help but frown. God, I just read this. What's going on? You couldn't help but frown. Test? Deployed? You stood there for a moment stupidly, only beginning to move once you felt Eri's hand jerk you along. She was already headed for the long medical chair. Upon closer inspection, you could see now that there were leather restraints for the arms and legs, and this little girl had been enduring this time and time again, all on her own. You felt sick. It's okay, traveler. Eri was still tightly gripping your hand in her own. She beamed up at you with a smile so bright it could put the sun to shame. You'd come here to protect her, but it looked like she was the one doing the protecting instead. You bit your lip and mustered up every ounce of your courage. No, you'd come far enough. Your fears and emotions didn't even matter anymore. The only person that mattered in this moment was Eri. Without warning, you pulled her into your arms and gave her a tight squeeze. Her big doe eyes stared back at you in confusion. You smiled and gently patted the top of her head. You're a strong girl, Eri-chan. I know you are. Today I'll be with you the whole time. So the second you feel it's too much, just let me know, okay? Okay. Promise? Yes, I promise. From across the room, Chisaki gave you a knowing glance. He and Kiran were still in the middle of setting up the equipment, but it looked like it wouldn't be much longer until the dreaded experiment began. You inhaled sharply, lifting Eri up and onto the chair. She barely even fit the whole thing, with how small she was. There was a belt dangling off the edge, which you pulled taut and fastened across her hips. You'll have to tie it tighter than that. All of a sudden, you were aware of a body behind you. Kieran glared at you through beady irises, shouldering you out of the way and taking it upon himself to fasten Aries' bindings. He started with the belt you'd secured, but then stopped as if remembering something. You watched, pulse quickening, as he began unwrapping the bandages on Aries' arms and legs. The gleam in the little girl's eyes from earlier was all but gone. She looked away from you, shameful, as all the bandages came off and her bare flesh was exposed. Scars? Lacerations? Everywhere. You wanted to cry, but you were too upset to even form the tears. You inhaled deeply, slowly, urging yourself to think back to just earlier. You were no longer afraid of Chisaki. You would no longer resent Chisaki, even if he'd put this innocent girl through hell and ripped you from your previous life. You would learn to understand Chisaki, to understand just why he'd chosen to forsake his humanity the way he had. Most importantly, you would become Aries' guardian. You couldn't fault now. You couldn't get caught up in anger or wallow in regret. Kieran finished with the rest of his bindings. Now Aries' hands and feet were glued to the chair, utterly immobile. You wouldn't say it aloud, but you thanked Kieran for taking over when he had. That way you didn't have to be the one robbing this girl of her freedom. Chisaki cleared his throat. Ahem. We are just about to begin. Once the experiment is underway, the door will close off and no one is allowed to enter or exit. This way, traveler, if you were still having any doubts, now would be the time to leave. You lowered your gaze. Ari was staring at you from the chair, still from that wrenched, bound position. The lights in the room were white hot, and a familiar smell was burning at your nostrils. Something akin to the ripe scent of antiseptic in hospitals. God damn it, this thing's getting annoying. Hold on. There we go. The machine purred and hummed in tandem. You lifted your head. Of course not. I will be with Eri-chan the whole time. Chisaki nodded, and you thought his eyes softened for a moment. Very well then, you may remain beside her, but please be sure to follow my instructions. If at any point I need you to move or otherwise assist me, I expect your full cooperation. You have my word. Kuron's eyes never lost their edge, not even as he crouched down beside Eri and grabbed her little hand in your own. You could have sworn you heard him scoff, but maybe your mind was playing tricks on you. Or maybe it was all the buzz from the machinery. It didn't matter. Experiment or not, this was something that hurt Eri, and you would never allow her to suffer through it alone again. You heard the click of computer keys and then several beeps before something else wired to life. The empty cylindrical glass units in the corner of the room began to glow a pale maroon. The tubes hooked up to the chair wheezed and hissed as if they'd awoken from a long slumber. Behind you, slow lumbering steps approached. You turned to see Chisaki gripping a scalpel between his gloved fingers. Now let's get started. Ever since you'd been brought down here, you could tell you'd undergone a massive change. At the beginning, the mere thought of Chisaki being involved in a gang, let alone be the leader, was enough to chill you to the bone. You'd spent countless hours speculating as to what exactly his job consisted of. Meeting with other Oh my god, come on, I just read this. And this thing is starting to get annoying. Okay, there we go. Okay. Where was I? Fascination, never mind. Of organized crime, drafting villains to be on their side, eliminating the competition. All of this was more than plausible. That's an irritating. Especially now that you knew of the League's involvement. Yet, even with all of what you'd already known, the most horrifying aspect was surely your discovery of Eri. You could still vividly recall the day you found her in that cold, darkened room. Every detail had been permanently etched into your skull, and now to think that you'd come so far as to have a Chisaki allow you to be a part of their experiments. No more accurately to think that you'd actually been able to stomach it. That was the scary part. There you go, you smiled, all tucked in and ready for bed. You must be tired, Eri-chan. Try to get some rest now, okay? Oh my fucking god. Okay. The little girl slowly bobbed her head from underneath the covers. Thank you, traveler, for being there for me. It wasn't so scary with you around. Of course, I won't let you go through that alone anymore, I promise. You leaned in to press a quick kiss to her forehead, just by the base of her horn. You headed for the doorway. If anything happens, or if you just want to talk, you can drop by my room whenever, alright? Okay, thank you. You smiled and turned off the lights, closing the door behind you, as you left. All of 5 seconds later, you collapsed to your knees. Uh-oh, you lifted your palms before your eyes. They were trembling furiously. A slow tear slid down your cheek, a mixture of fear and relief. So you were still terrified of this after all. Good. You couldn't afford to let down your guard, to dull your emotions, to cast aside your humanity. I'm still scared. None of this is normal. God damn it. None of this is normal. But, traveler, you looked up to find Chisaki staring down at you. His dark brows knitted together. Needed? I don't know. He must have noticed you'd been crying. You stood up in a hurry, wiping away your damp eyes. But that's okay. I'll get through it. I'm here for a reason. I know that now. My apologies. You soon found that smile graced your features, and it didn't even feel forced. It was odd. Chisaki himself had been the one performing the experiments on Eri, hurting her, but for some reason just looking into his golden eyes put you at ease. You were crying, he stated matter-of-factly. You knew there was no benefit in lying. Yes, I'm sorry. It came over me rather suddenly. I suppose seeing Eri-chan have to go through that was still a little difficult, of course. I intend to be there every time if it helps her feel better. It just wasn't awfully pleasant to watch. Chisaki stared at you in silence. After a few moments, a gloved hand beckoned you forth. Come on, my sweet. Let's go have a chat for a bit. You nodded in earnest, following behind him until you reached your very own room. Normally, Chisaki would bring you to his office if he had something he really wanted to discuss. There, you were scarcely interrupted, since everyone knew the boss's working quarters was off limits. You wondered why he was bringing you back to your room, then, unless... A flush of crimson erupted across your cheeks. You faltered when Chisaki gestured you to take a seat beside him on the bed, half expecting that he'd pin you down instead. Well, maybe you were the one getting too ahead of yourself here. Chisaki-kun? Things are difficult for you, aren't they, traveler? You blinked. Sorry? Living here, he elaborated. In this sort of environment, I'm sure it can't come naturally to you, especially since it's such a drastic change from the sort of life you previously held. You especially seem to possess a great deal of empathy, which is why it pains you to know we are using Eri's body to develop this drug, correct? Well, yes. You didn't know where he was going with this. Should you be worried? Were you becoming too weak for him? A thorn in his side. I'm sorry that is the case. You blinked again. What? Were you hearing him correctly? It almost sounded like he was apologizing to you. After all this time, after having kidnapped you and taken you from your family, your friends, your home, without the slightest show of remorse. He'd removed his mask now and was staring at you with a warm, almost tender gaze. His lips were pressed into a tight, lipped smile. You weren't sure how to read him in this moment. Something felt off. Different. Your lips moved wordlessly, and Chisaki's arms fell around you. It took you a moment to even realize that he was holding you, hugging you. But why? Because you'd been crying earlier? Surely not. Chisaki-kun, you couldn't keep the confusion out of your voice, but Chisaki's hold only tightened. You could feel his breath, hot by your ear. I was overcome by the urge to hold you. Is that so? Your entire face, even your nape, was on fire. He'd kissed you before, but he'd even been intimate with you before, but this was something new. It was probably the first time he'd ever held you this way, his arms shaking slightly, and his heart beating so fiercely you could feel it against your own chest. There was vulnerability in this embrace. This was a side to Chisaki that he'd never shown you before. I'm happy, you finally breathed. You didn't know what else to say. What else was there to say? So you simply hugged him back. You were so much smaller than he was, so much feebler and lacking in power. But in this moment, it almost felt like you were bigger and stronger than him, enough to hold him tight and feel like you were the one protecting him for a change. Protecting him from what you weren't quite sure. But it felt as if both your hearts had stilled. Chisaki's grip slowly loosened, just enough for him to pull away and gaze into your eyes. You didn't even wait another second before kissing him. He welcomed you without a moment's hesitation, his hands gripping your waist and tongue rolling against your own. He hummed against your mouth. You taste sweet, traveler. You pulled away, breathless. You could see the hint of a flush on his cheeks. It made your chest ache. How could he show you such adorable expressions and also be a criminal, a murderer? It didn't make any sense. If only he was kind to others as he was with you. But no, maybe that was wrong. Maybe that was where all the beauty lay, in knowing that you were the only one he graced with such a smile. He made you feel special. He made you feel irreplaceable, so much so that you were drunk off the way he treated you. Your hands fell to your lap. I'm sick. Chisaki brushed a strand of hair out of your eyes. He prodded your chin with his finger. What is it, traveler? But I don't really care anymore. You lifted your head, digging your fingers into Chisaki's shoulders as you sank back into his lips. He didn't protest, not even with how impatient you were being. Not for a moment. His kiss was burning you from the inside out, and his musk fell in, velvety ribbons all around you. He bit down on your lip with urgency, and you had to stifle a moan. He was a criminal. I don't care. He was a murderer. I don't care. He was the bane of Aries' very existence. I just don't fucking care anymore. Your lust and desire had finally overthrown your logic. This was your life now, and he was your person. Him, the man before you, whose strength had brought countless to their final breath, was stealing your breath away now too. And you never wanted him to stop. You broke away from the kiss, lips hot and raw, your eyes were glistening with tears, and you could see stars all around. Chisaki stared down at you in confusion. You lifted your palm and cradled it against his cheek. I think I'm in love with you, Chisaki-kun. His eyes widened. Chapter 25. Dynamic shift. I'm gonna fall over. Hold on. There we go. No, we're not reading. No. Okay. This chapter is from Chisaki's point of view. And then there's the issue of the fight that broke out in the Kansai region. Seems as though someone who'd gotten hold of the unfinished project used it on a hero on the streets. From what I gather, it only lasted about overhaul? Chisaki lifted his eyes. Kieran was gripping at a stack of papers, staring back at him expectantly. He supposed he'd been zoning out for a bit. How odd, in the middle of an important discussion, no less. Continue, he waved off. I'm listening. Kieran cleared his throat. Yes, well, based on the productivity of yesterday's test, I believe the finalized product is all but in our grasp. I was going to ask that you take a look at the values, just to be sure, but I believe we've done it. The finalized product. Finally, after long work, the means with which to extinguish one's quirk was a reality. This would mean a sure end to those wretched hero types that, coupled with the quirk-enhancing serum which had been going around the black market, would reverse the sting of power between heroes and villains, and the Aki-san at the center of it all. This is excellent news. Chisaki leaned back, adjusting his tie. His thoughts had been drifting ever since yesterday. It was because you said something so unpredictable. That's why he'd been caught off guard, but nothing else. His goal was within sight. He couldn't afford to waver now. I'll be over a bit later. I still have something I need to finish up here. Of course, overhaul. Was there something else? He shook his head. No, not really. Just regarding those two young heroes you encountered on the streets. I think we should exert prudence from here on out. Already the cops are looking to uncover all the dirt on us they can possibly find. They've most likely deduced we're the ones developing this drug. They may not know exactly how close we were to completion, but I think it's safe to assume they'll be acting from here on out. Chisaki affirmed. I think the same. Nevertheless, if we've nearly secured our finished product, we can't afford to stop now. We have a few days at the very least. They'll need to send out their lackeys and scouts before launching an attack, especially if they'll need the authorities' cooperation. And what about the girl? Eri? What about her? No, Kieran stammered. The other girl, Traveler. In the event that they come here to storm our headquarters, then... Chisaki's eyes narrowed. That's not something you need to concern yourself with. I will deal with Traveler accordingly, as I always have. Of course. I just worry that her involvement, especially at such a peak stage, may result in... I will deal with Traveler, Chisaki repeated, his golden orbs glinting with something fierce. He was starting to get irritated. Just the mention of your name spilled from another man's lips, and so hazardously at that, was enough to have him seeing red. He knew without Kieran telling him, his involvement with you wasn't going to prevent his goal from coming to fruition. Oh my god. Fruition. The pronunciation ain't just, it's no. It just wasn't. Yes, of course, Kieran bowed deeply before heading for the door. Then please excuse me. Chisaki was left to his own devices, thankfully in part for the silence, but also dreading that he was once again alone with his thoughts. The product was all but finished. He should be overjoyed just knowing how many vile quirks would be erased from the world. He should have been focused on that, and that alone. So why was it that every time he closed his eyes, your image immediately came to mind? He gritted his teeth, throwing his mask off in a fit of frustration. He still couldn't erase you from his thoughts. Your soft features, your gentle smile, the way your eyes had sparkled when you looked up at him between tears. Chisaki-kun? Great, now he was even imagining hearing your voice. Hey, Chisaki-kun. A light poke to his cheek brought him back. He felt your warmth, as your fingers grazed his skin. He slowly turned his head to find you standing before him, a coy smile on your lips. Traveler? He didn't know why he said your name so uncertainly. He wondered when you'd even gotten in, or just how long you'd been wrestling with his thoughts for. You tucked a strand of hair behind your ear and giggled softly. I guess even you can daydream every now and then, huh? You were really out of it. He cleared his throat. I suppose so. I didn't get much sleep last night. Things are getting quite busy around here. His gaze fleeted down to his desk. For some reason, He was unable to make eye contact with you. Your words from before kept playing in the back of his head, like a broken record. I think I'm in love with you. I think I'm in love with you. I think I'm in love with you. Is everything okay? He leaned over his side, pressing a hand against his cheek. Chisaki shifted as you moved to sit down in his lap. Your face is really flushed, Chisaki-kun. He watched as your brows furrowed. Concern? Worry? You were worried for him? Nonsense. He wasn't someone who needed to be protected or coddled, yet still, you were looking at him in such a way. Everything is fine. Never mind, nope. There is simply a lot that needs to get done. You hummed. That makes sense. If it was anyone else in your position, I'm sure they'd be stressed out of their minds. I don't know how you handle it. There is a lot of responsibility, but I don't mind. If it's to realize an important ambition of mine, I'm more than willing to put the time and effort in. You're so hard-working, Chisaki-kun. A sultry smile played at your lips. You leaned over, dangling your arms across Chisaki's shoulders, and shifting until your chest was pressed flush against his own. You giggled to yourself and began lightly kissing along his jawline. Seeing you so forward and needy was already making his bottom half throb with longing. Curse this woman. She's making me lose all sense of reason. Oh, you drew your lips back for a moment, a perplexed look setting across your features. I just realized you aren't wearing your mask. When did you take it off? He inhaled through his teeth. Just a bit earlier. I was finding it slightly difficult to breathe. A blatant lie, but it spared him the humiliation of having to explain he'd thrown it off in a fit. More importantly, why had you stopped? He didn't say you could stop. You really are stressed. You smiled to yourself, placing a quick kiss on Chisaki's lips, one that was far too chastity for his liking. His brows jolted upwards once he realized you were pulling off his lap. And they stayed there. Unmoving. Even as you fell to your knees before him. You pawed gently at his knees, gesturing for him to move his legs so you could settle in closer. I'll try to help you relax, you smiled, a pink flush speckling your cheeks. Chisaki watched your every movement, the fingers working up his legs, your quiet, flushed breaths, and the way your hands impatiently pulled at his belt. Oh, you don't need to mind me. If you're busy, I can just do this as you work. Your smile was so innocent, so starkly in contrast to the lewd actions you were about to perform. Chisaki was already more than aroused, but he still couldn't stop his head from reeling. His chest was uncomfortably tight. He didn't even feel like himself anymore. This sensation was too foreign. Too much. Wait, traveler. He barely gasped the word out before your hands could tear off his belt. Let's resume this later. There's something I need to show you first. Your ears perked up. Oh, sure. Chisaki couldn't help but notice you looked the slightest bit disappointed as you pulled away. He felt the same way. He too wanted nothing more than to take you right here and now. But he neglected something for far too long. He needed to show you. It was the right moment, and you were the right person. Follow me, he beckoned, picking his mask up and adjusting it back in place. You nodded in agreement, trailing behind him without so much as a word. He didn't sense any hesitation or unease on your part. Did you trust him so blindly that you would walk into anything so long as he told you? The mere thought had him trickled pink. I think I'm in love with you. Again, your words reverberated through his skull. He bit down on his lip. This was absurd, a grown man such as himself mulling over a phrase like that. Where exactly are we going, Chisaki-kun? Finally, you'd spoken up through your voice, though your voice didn't sound nervous or anything, more so perplexed. He supposed that was understandable. He'd been leading you through an area of the underground which you'd never once visited before. Few had reason to head this way, since most of the operatives now took place underground, but you had a right to know, to see with your own eyes where it had all began, and what was left of it. We will arrive soon enough. Chisaki stopped to grab your hand in his own. We have to head up these stairs first. Watch your step. You mumbled out a quiet thank you before taking his hand, even through the latex of his gloves, he could feel your body's heat pooling into his. Your touch was so gentle, even now. It occurred to him that in all the time he'd known you, even when he'd taken you by force, your touch had never borne the slightest hint of malice. Perhaps that had been partly out of fear, but Chisaki's chest swelled with something akin to pride, the pride of knowing that you were all his. Just through this door. He let go of your hand, but only to step forward and slide the door open for you. Your brows were scrunched together as you walked, eyes fleeting every which way. Your mouth parted, but you promptly snapped it shut. You seemed to be looking for the right words. So, this is the official residence of our group. Many years ago, before the Yaki-san's power began to dwindle, this was our main office and base. Chisaki watched as you tiptoed curiously across the titanium flooring. Oh, that's not what that says. As you probably surmised, I don't know. He went on. It rarely sees use nowadays, with the authorities being so wary of our each and every move. We've had to retreat back into our secret underground in order to carry out our plan. At this point, it's more decorative than anything else. I come up here along with some attendants from time to time, if only to make sure it's being maintained properly. We have some others patrolling the area as well. You appeared a touch confused, but your smile didn't waver. Wow, it really is a traditional Japanese layout, huh? This is so cool. When I think of the Yaki-san, this is what comes to mind, after all. Yes, years ago, we only ever used these here residences. That was before we started developing the anti-quirk product, of course. Chisaki gestured for you to follow him again, and you did, dutifully so. You weren't asking many questions, just scoping out the area with wide eyes and pursed lips. Just a bit longer and you'd reach it. Didn't you have anything you wanted to know? You were usually so curious and starved for answers. He almost felt inclined now to offer you some sort of explanation. It's for safety measures, he finally breathed out. Huh? He turned to look back at you. I'm sure you're probably wondering why I never brought you here before. The police already have this area under their surveillance. For us, it's really just a way to maintain appearances, since the underground serves as our actual base. Admittedly, the main office is far more preferable in the interest of comfort, but I couldn't risk bringing you here and having the authorities catch word that we'd taken a civilian. I apologize for that, but why are you apologizing? The question was as innocent as it was abrupt. You were staring back at him, head cocked to the side. Chisaki faltered. Yes, exactly. Why was he apologizing? He had no reason to. From the beginning, all he'd done was ensure that you were protected and well taken care of. He already graced you with a side of himself that he'd never shown anyone else. So why was he apologizing? It was as if, to some degree, he actually believed he could do better for you, be better, be more for you. You were perfect and deserved nothing short of perfection. At what point had these thoughts taken over his mind? I don't mind, you smiled, sparing him from having to make a retort. I understand that many things are difficult, which is why you have to be extra careful. It certainly seems like a nice place, but if no one's usually around, then I'm Sure, I'd get lonely, you chuckled sheepishly. I'd prefer being able to see you more often in any case. Chisaki swallowed. His throat felt parched. You were driving him mad with thirst. The insatiable desire to have all of you at any given moment. Let's keep walking, he coughed. What I wanted to show you is at the end of this hall. You chirped in agreement, and Chisaki could swear he was starting to feel faint. He rubbed at his temples with gloved fingers. Finally, stopping before the room he sought out. He inhaled once sharply before sliding it open and stepping inside. The soft hum of a machine, tubes hissing and wheezing as they conducted the flow of oxygen. The man in the bed. At first, Chisaki just stood there, hovering by the man's bedside in total silence. His golden eyes drifted over the man's comatose frame. A point in his chest squeezed, and then he turned to you. This is the former head of the Hakizai, he told you. He paused for a moment, noting the shift in your expression. And the man who took me. Oh no. Okay, so he was also taken. Alright. Okay. We're gonna end here. Check her out. She's a good writer. I gotta read more of her stories. She's really good. I might go. Nah, okay. So I read more than I thought I was going to. I had a little extra time, I suppose. That's where we're going to end today's video. Thanks for watching, and you will hear me in the next video. Bye!